There was a moment when everything seemed to be finished, not because you, God, had stopped working, but because no one could see what you were doing, and that moment was not defined by noise or visible signs, but by a silence that felt complete, a silence that confused, that weighed heavily, and that made it seem as though what had been promised would never come to pass. There was no external evidence showing that anything was still moving, no answers that gave direction, no clarity that could sustain hope. And yet even in that state where everything appeared to be still, you were still God, and your work had not paused for a single moment. Because the way you act is not dependent on what man perceives, nor on what circumstances reveal, but on your eternal purpose, which does not stop even when everything around seems to have reached its end. And today, as I consider that, I recognize that many times my life enters into that same kind of silence. Not an empty silence, but a silence I do not understand. A place where there are no clear answers, no visible direction, no immediate confirmation that anything is happening. And it is in that place where my mind begins to interpret what it cannot see, where my heart begins to weaken due to the lack of evidence, and where I can easily assume that everything has stopped, when in reality you are still working in a way that I cannot yet perceive. Your word in Isaiah 55:8 declares that your thoughts are not like ours, nor are your ways like ours. And that reminds me that what I interpret as absence may in fact be a deeper work that has not yet been revealed. Father, in those moments where there is no clarity, where silence lingers, and where there are no signs to support what I am waiting for, I need to be guarded in how I interpret what is happening, because the danger is not only in what I cannot see, but in what I conclude because of it. Do not allow my mind to fill that silence with what is not true. Do not allow my heart to drift into doubt simply because there is no visible evidence. And do not allow me to assume that everything has stopped when, in reality, your work continues to move forward, beyond my sight, but never beyond your control. Because I understand that not everything you do is revealed immediately, and not everything in process is visible while it is taking place. Lord, just as your word shows that there was a time when everything appeared sealed, when a stone marked what many believed to be the end, and when there was no sign that anything different would happen, I also recognize that there are moments where my life feels that same way, where what I see looks final, where what I experience feels closed, and where silence seems to confirm what I fear. But your word also shows that what looked like the end was not the end, and what seemed still was being prepared for something greater. So today, I do not want to base my understanding on what I see, nor on what I feel, nor on what appears evident before my eyes, but on the truth that you do not stop, that your work is not interrupted, and that even when there are no visible signs, you remain faithful to what you have established. Father, help me remain steady in that kind of silence, not trying to force answers, not trying to rush what is not yet ready, and not trying to fill with my own understanding what has not yet been revealed. Teach me to remain without anxiety, to wait without desperation, and to trust without needing to immediately see what you are doing, because I understand that faith is not sustained by visible evidence, but by the certainty that you are working even when I cannot perceive it. Your word in Hebrews 11:1 declares that faith is the substance of what is hoped for and the evidence of what is not seen. And today I hold on to that truth, not as a concept, but as a posture I need to maintain. Lord, guard my heart from interpreting your silence as absence. Guard my mind from assuming that you are no longer working, and guard my spirit from weakening because of the lack of evidence, because I understand that silence does not define your presence, and the absence of visible signs does not define your activity. You remain the same, you remain in control, and you remain at work even when I do not have the ability to see it in this moment. And with that truth, I remain steady, not trying to understand everything, but resting in the fact that you see, and you are bringing everything to fulfillment at the right time. So today I come before you not with demands, not with conclusions, and not with desperation, but with a willingness to trust what I do not yet understand, knowing that what appears still is not still, what appears silent is not empty, and what appears finished may only be part of a process that has not yet been fully revealed. And in that, I choose to remain steady, not because I have evidence, but because I have the certainty that you are still working, even in the silence. Father, in the kind of silence where nothing seems to move and where there is no visible confirmation of what you are doing, I recognize that the greatest battle is not found in what surrounds me, but in what takes place within me, in the way my thoughts begin to process what they cannot explain, and in how my understanding attempts to define what has not yet been revealed. I do not want to reduce your work to what I can perceive, nor do I want to measure your activity by what is visible before my eyes. because I understand that your ways are not limited to what can be observed, and your purpose does not depend on my ability to recognize it in the moment. Lord, I ask that you guard my understanding so that I do not misinterpret what you are allowing, because silence has a way of creating assumptions, and the absence of visible movement can easily lead me to conclusions that are not rooted in truth. Your word reveals that there are moments where what is taking place cannot be seen by human eyes, yet it is still fully under your authority, and I need to remain anchored in that reality instead of being influenced by what appears to be happening around me. I do not want my faith to depend on evidence, because I know that if I rely only on what I can confirm, I will begin to question what you are doing the moment I no longer see movement, and that is not where I want to stand. Father, there are moments where silence creates pressure, where waiting feels like standing still, and where not having clarity can begin to affect how I think and how I respond internally. But I also understand that not every pause is delay and not every silence is absence, and I do not want to confuse what is still with what is finished. What appears to be unmoving can still be under construction. What seems inactive can still be unfolding, and what feels unresolved can still be in the exact place where you are working with precision beyond my perception. I do not want to step outside of that understanding simply because I do not see immediate results. Lord, just as your word shows that what seemed sealed was not final, I recognize that I cannot define the outcome of what I am facing based on what I currently see, because you are not limited to what is visible, and your work is not restricted to what I can understand in the moment. There was a point where everything appeared concluded, where there was no indication that anything else would happen, and yet what was taking place in that silence was not the end, but the preparation for what would follow. In the same way, I do not want to prematurely define what you are still working on, nor do I want to assume that nothing is happening simply because it has not yet been revealed. Father, I release the need to explain everything, because I understand that understanding is not what sustains me in these moments. Trust is what sustains me. And trust does not require immediate evidence in order to remain. Your word in Isaiah 55:8 reminds me that your thoughts are higher than mine, and that your ways operate beyond what I can fully comprehend. And because of that, I choose to remain grounded in what you have spoken rather than in what I am currently experiencing. I do not want my perception to define my faith. I want your truth to define it. Lord, strengthen my ability to remain steady in what I do not understand, not trying to fill the silence with my own reasoning, not trying to rush what has not yet unfolded, and not trying to force clarity where you have not yet revealed it. Instead, allow me to remain positioned in patience, aligned with what you are doing, and anchored in the certainty that your work continues whether I can see it or not. I understand that your process is not dependent on my awareness, and that what you are establishing does not require my understanding in order to move forward. Father, protect my heart from becoming unsettled in these moments. Protect my thoughts from drifting into conclusions that are not rooted in truth, and protect my spirit from weakening simply because there is no visible evidence of movement. Because I understand that your presence is not defined by what I can measure, and your activity is not dependent on what I can observe. You remain constant, you remain in control, and you remain fully engaged in what concerns me even when I cannot perceive it. Lord, I also recognize that there is a responsibility in how I respond to this silence, because I can either allow it to shape my faith or weaken it, and I choose to allow it to establish something deeper within me, something that is not dependent on circumstances, something that is not shaken by what I do not see, and something that remains firm regardless of what is happening around me. I do not want to come out of this moment with doubt. I want to come out of it with a stronger trust, not because everything became visible, but because I remained anchored in what is true. Father, I choose to remain in that place of trust, not needing to understand everything, not needing to see immediate results, and not needing to confirm what you are doing through visible signs, but resting in the certainty that what you have started is still in motion, that what you have allowed is not without purpose, and that what appears silent is still under your hand, being shaped and brought to completion according to your will. Father, as I remain in this place where everything appears quiet and where nothing around me provides confirmation of what you are doing, I acknowledge that silence does not cancel your authority, nor does it interrupt the fulfillment of what you have already determined. What is hidden from my sight is not hidden from your control, and what is not revealed to me is still fully established before you. Because of that, I refuse to interpret this moment through what I can measure, and instead I choose to anchor my understanding in what you have declared, knowing that your word does not shift simply because I do not see immediate manifestation. Your word in Habakkuk 2:3 declares that the vision is yet for an appointed time, that it hastens toward its fulfillment and will not fail, and that even if it seems delayed, it must be awaited, because it will surely come and will not be late. I hold on to that truth because it corrects the way I perceive what feels postponed, and it realigns my understanding when silence begins to feel like inactivity. What appears delayed from my perspective is not delayed in your timing, and what seems absent in my experience is not absent in your process. You do not operate within the limitations of my perception, and you do not require visible evidence in order to continue what you have already set in motion. Lord, I recognize that one of the greatest difficulties in these moments is not the silence itself, but the way silence confronts what is within me, because it exposes whether I am grounded in what you have spoken or whether I am dependent on what I can see. When there is movement, it is easier to remain steady, but when everything appears still, what is truly established within me becomes evident, and I do not want to be found unstable in that place. I do not want my confidence to depend on visible confirmation, nor do I want my trust to weaken simply because I do not perceive immediate results. Father, guard me from the tendency to measure progress by what is visible, because I understand that your work often takes place beneath the surface before it becomes evident outwardly. What is being formed in silence carries weight that cannot be produced through what is seen, and what is established in hiddenness often holds greater strength than what is immediately revealed. I do not want to disregard what you are doing simply because it is not visible, and I do not want to assume that nothing is happening simply because I cannot detect it. Lord, I also recognize that silence removes distractions, and in doing so, it reveals where my attention truly rests. When there are no visible signs, no immediate responses, and no external confirmation, what remains is my posture before you, and I want that posture to remain steady, not shifting with uncertainty, not reacting to what I do not understand, and not weakening under the weight of what I cannot explain. Instead, I desire to remain aligned with what is true even when it is not yet visible. Father, establish within me a clarity that is not dependent on circumstance, a steadiness that does not fluctuate with what I perceive, and an alignment that remains even when everything around me appears unchanged. I do not want to be moved by what is temporary, and I do not want to be influenced by what is incomplete, because I understand that what is incomplete is still in process, and what is in process is still under your authority. There is nothing unfinished that is outside of your control, and there is nothing unresolved that escapes your oversight. Lord, remove from me the inclination to define what is happening prematurely, because I understand that conclusions formed in silence can often be incorrect if they are not grounded in your truth. I do not want to assign meaning to what I do not yet understand, and I do not want to create interpretations that are shaped by uncertainty instead of truth. Instead, I choose to remain positioned in trust, allowing your word to define what is true rather than allowing my perception to shape what I believe. Father, strengthen my endurance in this place, not as a form of passive waiting, but as an active trust that remains steady without visible confirmation. I do not want to move ahead of what you are establishing, nor do I want to retreat simply because I do not see progress. Instead, I choose to remain, to stand, and to continue aligned with what you have already spoken, knowing that what you have declared does not require immediate evidence in order to be valid. Lord, I also acknowledge that what you establish in silence often requires a deeper level of trust, because it removes the reliance on external reinforcement and places full dependence on you. That kind of dependence cannot be formed when everything is visible, and it cannot be strengthened when everything is clear. It is in this place, where nothing appears to be happening, that trust is either weakened or established, and I choose for it to be established. Father, I do not want to leave this place unchanged, and I do not want to come out of this silence with the same understanding that I entered with. Instead, I desire to come out of it with a strengthened trust, with a steadier posture, and with a deeper alignment with your truth, not because everything became visible, but because I remained anchored in what is unchanging. So in this moment, where there is no visible movement, and where silence continues to surround what I am facing, I remain grounded in the certainty that you are still working, that what you have determined is still unfolding, and that what appears still is not inactive, but is being carried forward according to your will, in a way that does not depend on my understanding but on your faithfulness, which does not fail and does not stop, even in the silence. Father, as I remain before you at the end of this time, I recognize that what has been established here is not meant to remain as words spoken in a moment, but as truth that must continue beyond it, shaping how I think, how I respond, and how I remain when I step back into what surrounds me. Because silence does not end when this moment ends, and what I face will not immediately change simply because I have prayed. I understand that what must remain is not the feeling of this moment, but the alignment that has been formed within it. What you establish internally must continue to govern what I carry forward. Otherwise, I will return to interpreting what I see instead of standing on what you have declared. Your word in Lamentations 3:25-26 declares that you are good to those who wait for you, to the soul that seeks you, and that it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. And I hold on to that truth because it defines how I must remain in this kind of silence. Waiting is not inactivity, and quietness is not emptiness. It is a position where trust is not dependent on visible confirmation, and where the absence of immediate answers does not produce instability. What you call good does not always align with what feels comfortable, and what you establish as right does not always align with what I would choose. But I do not want to redefine what you have already established simply because I do not understand it fully. Lord, I acknowledge that once I leave this moment, there will still be areas where nothing appears to move, where no answer is given, and where silence continues. And it is in those moments that what has been formed within me must remain steady. I do not want to return to interpreting silence as absence, nor do I want to return to measuring your work by what I can see, because I understand that if I return to those patterns, I will weaken what has been established here. Instead, I choose to carry forward the understanding that what is unseen is not inactive, and that what is not revealed is not undone. Father, establish within me a consistency that does not depend on how I feel in a given moment, because I understand that feelings can shift, but what you have spoken does not shift. What you have determined does not change based on my perception, and what you are doing does not stop based on what I can observe. Because of that, I choose to remain aligned with what is unchanging rather than with what is temporary, and I choose to stand on what is true rather than on what appears to be happening. Lord, I also recognize that silence tests endurance, not in the sense of passive waiting, but in the ability to remain steady without needing constant confirmation. I do not want to require repeated signs in order to continue trusting, and I do not want to depend on visible movement in order to remain aligned. Instead, I choose to remain grounded in what you have already established, knowing that what you begin, you complete, and that what you have set in motion does not require my understanding in order to reach its fulfillment. Father, remove from me the inclination to revisit what has already been settled, because I understand that doubt often returns when I begin to question what I had already aligned myself with. I do not want to reopen what has already been corrected, and I do not want to re-examine what has already been placed in order according to your truth. What you have established does not need to be redefined, and what you have aligned does not need to be reconsidered simply because silence continues. Lord, I choose to remain positioned in trust, not attempting to define what is still in process, not attempting to explain what has not yet been revealed, and not attempting to move ahead of what you are establishing. What is in process does not need my intervention, and what is unfolding does not require my control. I do not want to step into what belongs to you, and I do not want to take responsibility for what only you can complete. Father, I also acknowledge that remaining in this position requires discipline within my thoughts, because the mind will attempt to interpret what it does not understand, and it will attempt to create conclusions where none have been given. Guard my thoughts so that they do not drift into assumptions that are not grounded in truth, and establish within me a clarity that remains even when there is no visible evidence supporting it. What you have spoken is enough to sustain what I carry, and I do not need additional confirmation in order to remain aligned with it. Lord, as I continue forward, let what has been established within me produce stability, not instability, clarity, not confusion, and alignment, not division. I do not want to leave this place unchanged, and I do not want to return to patterns that contradict what has been formed. Instead, I choose to carry this understanding forward, allowing it to govern how I remain, even when everything around me appears unchanged. So I remain in that position, not because everything is clear, not because everything has been revealed, and not because I have received visible answers, but because I trust that what you are doing does not stop in silence, that what you have established does not fail in stillness, and that what appears inactive is still under your authority, being carried forward according to your will, which does not depend on my understanding, but on your faithfulness, which remains constant and does not cease, even when everything around appears to remain the same.